After 10 days in the field, I walked through my own front door expecting my daughter to come running with her arms out, the way she always did. Instead, I found her lying motionless on the living room floor while my husband sat 3 feet away, remote in hand, watching a golf tournament like nothing in the world was wrong. For one full second, I actually thought I was hallucinating from exhaustion. The lamp was on. His coffee mug was steaming on the side table. The television was murmuring something about a birdie putt. And my 6-year-old daughter, Maddie, was lying near the hallway rug, one shoe off, her stuffed elephant a few feet from her open hand. I dropped to my knees so fast I split the skin on my kneecap and didn't even feel it. When the paramedics arrived 7 minutes later, one of them knelt beside her while the other one looked up, looked at my husband standing in the doorway, and went completely still. Then he leaned toward me and said quietly, "Ma'am, I know exactly who that man is. And you need to hear this before he says another word. My name is Staff Sergeant Rachel Bennett. I was 39 years old, assigned to a transportation battalion out of Fort Stewart, Georgia. I had just come off a 10-day field rotation, sleeping in a cot, eating MREs, coordinating convoy schedules under portable lights until 2 in the morning. The whole time, all I thought about was getting home to Maddie. She was 6, missing both front teeth, and completely obsessed with elephants. I'd picked up a small stuffed one at the PX gift shop the week before I left, tucked it into my duffel bag, and pictured her squealing when she saw it. That elephant was the first thing I saw on the floor beside her. The house looked deceptively normal when I walked in. The porch light was on. The mail was stacked neatly by the door. My husband, Derek, was in his usual recliner, one leg crossed over the other, a golf tournament playing softly on the screen. It was the kind of ordinary scene that should have calmed me down. Instead, I saw Maddie. She was lying near the hallway entrance, her small body limp against the hardwood floor, her breathing so shallow I had to lean in just to confirm it was happening at all. My duffel bag hit the ground behind me. I don't even remember dropping it. "Maddie. Baby, open your eyes." Nothing. I looked up at Derek. He hadn't moved from the recliner. "What happened?" I asked. My voice didn't even sound like mine. He shrugged, eyes still half on the television. "She had a meltdown. I handled it. Derek. She's not moving. She's fine, Rachel. She does this for attention." I scooped her into my arms, her head lolling against my shoulder, and grabbed my phone with hands that were shaking too hard to dial correctly. The 911 dispatcher asked if she was breathing. I said yes, barely. She told me not to move her more than necessary and to keep her still until help arrived. Derek muttered something behind me about how this is completely unnecessary, but I wasn't listening anymore. I pressed my lips to Maddie's hair and counted her breaths until I heard sirens turning onto our street. The ambulance pulled into the driveway at 6:12 p.m. 2 paramedics came through the door fast, equipment bags swinging off their shoulders. One knelt immediately beside Maddie, checking her pupils, her pulse, asking me rapid questions I answered on autopilot. Name. Age. Any allergies. Any prior medical conditions. The second paramedic, a tall man with silver stubble and kind, tired eyes, glanced toward the living room where Derek had finally stood up from his recliner. He stopped mid-sentence. It wasn't dramatic. It was small, the kind of pause you'd miss if you weren't watching closely. His eyes narrowed slightly. His jaw tightened. Then he turned back to me, lowering his voice so only I could hear it. "Ma'am," he said carefully, "is that your husband?" "Yes," I said, confused. "Why?" He hesitated for exactly 1 second too long. "I don't think you know who you're actually married to." Before I could ask what he meant, they were already lifting Maddie onto the stretcher, moving toward the door. I climbed into the back of the ambulance beside her, refusing to let go of her hand. Derek didn't follow. He stood in the driveway with his arms crossed, watching us pull away like he was mildly inconvenienced by the whole event. If any of the neighbors saw, nobody said a word. The paramedic's name tag read Tia Reyes. He sat across from me during the ride, monitoring Maddie's vitals while his partner drove. I wanted to ask him what he meant back at the house. Instead, I just stared at my daughter's small fingers wrapped weakly around mine, at the faint bruise blooming near her temple that I somehow hadn't noticed until now. "She's stable," Reyes said gently, catching me staring. "Let's get her checked out first. We'll talk after." I nodded. It was the only thing keeping me from falling apart in that ambulance. While doctors examined Maddie in the emergency room, I sat alone in the waiting area with a paper cup of coffee that had already gone cold. A little boy stacked plastic blocks near the reception desk. An elderly couple shared a vending machine sandwich. Life kept moving around me while mine had completely stopped. I started remembering things. Not the bad ones, not yet. The good ones. The kind that make betrayal cut even deeper once you understand what they actually were. I'd met Derek 11 years earlier at a 4th of July cookout in Hinesville. I'd just come back from an overseas deployment. He worked in property management and coached Little League on weekends. Everyone in town seemed to know him and love him. "That's Derek," my friend Angela had told me. "Nicest guy you'll ever meet." She wasn't wrong, or at least, she wasn't wrong about what everyone believed. The bank teller knew his name. The youth pastor thanked him publicly for organizing the church food pantry. Neighbors borrowed his tools without asking twice. He had the kind of easy charm that made people trust him before he'd said more than a few sentences. I trusted him too. Army life is hard, the training, the deployments, the missed birthdays, the long silences on the other end of a satellite phone. Derek felt steady. Safe. Exactly the kind of man I believed Maddie deserved as a father. When we married, he stepped into the role naturally. Then, 3 years later, into fatherhood. In the beginning, he was wonderful with her, building blanket forts, teaching her to ride her first tricycle in the driveway, reading the same picture book so many times she had it memorized before she turned 4. Looking back now, from a hospital plastic chair with cold coffee shaking in my hand, I sometimes wonder if those memories were even real, or if I simply needed them to be. The changes had come so gradually I never noticed them accumulating. Derek didn't like me having dinner with the women from my unit. "They don't respect family," he'd say. He liked knowing exactly where I was, even on my days off. Innocent questions at first: "What time did you leave? Who was there? Why didn't you answer your phone?" Then those questions became routine. If I stopped for gas, he wanted to know why it took so long. If I bought something at Target, he wanted to see the receipt. If I laughed at a text message, he wanted to know who sent it. I told myself marriage required compromise, patience, understanding. Military families carry extra weight. Didn't every couple I knew struggle the same way? When I mentioned it once to Angela, she just shrugged. Some men are just protective. That word stuck with me. Protective. It sounded so much gentler than what it actually was. A nurse touched my shoulder, pulling me out of the memory. "Mrs. Bennett? Your daughter's awake." I stood so fast my coffee spilled across the floor and didn't even notice. As I followed the nurse down the hallway, I saw the paramedic, Reyes, standing near the doorway of Maddie's room, staring through the glass at Derek, who had just arrived. His expression wasn't angry. It was worse. It was recognition. And whatever memory had surfaced behind his eyes had drained every drop of color from his face. Maddie smiled when I walked in, but it wasn't the smile I knew. It was careful, hesitant, like she was checking whether it was safe to smile at all. That single detail hurt more than anything the doctors had told me so far. She reached for my hand and squeezed it with surprising strength. Then her eyes flicked toward the hallway. "Is Daddy here?" "He's outside, sweetheart." Her whole body went rigid. "Can he stay outside?" The room suddenly felt smaller than it was. I pulled my chair closer to her bed. Of course he can. Only then did she relax against the pillow. The ER physician explained she had a mild concussion, no bleeding, thankfully, but they wanted her overnight for observation. What happened? He asked gently. Before I could answer, Derek stepped into the room. She was throwing a tantrum, he said smoothly. She tripped and hit her head on the coffee table. Kids fall all the time. The doctor nodded politely but kept writing without looking up. He wasn't convinced. Neither was I. Not anymore. That night, after Maddie finally fell asleep, I sat alone in the family waiting area replaying the last 2 years of small things I'd dismissed as unimportant. Now they lined up like pieces of a puzzle I'd refused to finish. Maddie used to run to the door when Derek's truck pulled into the driveway. She'd race across the house just to greet him. Sometime in the last year, she'd simply stopped. I told myself she'd outgrown it. She'd also gotten quieter. Not all at once, gradually, the way water rises before you notice the flood. Her kindergarten teacher, Mrs. Alden, had asked me once during a parent conference, "Has Maddie been sleeping well?" I'd smiled and said as far as I knew. She'd hesitated. "She's been drawing a lot of storms lately." I laughed it off. "Too many Disney movies," I said. Mrs. Alden smiled back, but something in her eyes wasn't asking about crayon drawings. There were bruises too. Children get bruises, every parent knows that. She ran into the coffee table. She slipped in the driveway. She bumped the kitchen counter. Every explanation sounded reasonable enough, until I realized every single one of them had come from Derek. Never from Maddie herself. Our neighbor, Mrs. Castillo, had stopped me once while I watered the flower beds. "I hope you don't mind me asking," she'd said carefully. "I heard some yelling yesterday." I felt my face flush and told her Derek was just trying to get Maddie to clean her room. She'd nodded slowly. "If you ever need anything." I thanked her too quickly and changed the subject. She wasn't being nosy. She was giving me an opening. I'd closed it without even realizing. The hardest memory came from the night before my last field rotation. I'd been packing my gear while Maddie sat on my bed hugging her stuffed elephant. "When are you coming home?" she'd asked. 10 days, I said. She'd looked down at her lap. "I wish you didn't have to go." Then, glancing at the door to make sure Derek wasn't nearby, she'd whispered, "I'll be extra good." At the time, I'd kissed her forehead and smiled. Now those 4 words echoed through my head like an alarm I should have heard years ago. Not because they were sweet, because they sounded exactly like a child trying to survive. Around 6 the next morning, I stepped into the hallway to stretch and found Reyes leaning against the nurse's station with a styrofoam coffee cup. When he saw me, he excused himself from his conversation and walked over. "You holding up?" he asked. "I've had better mornings." He gave a sympathetic nod, then I asked the question that had kept me awake all night. "What did you mean back at the house?" He glanced down the hallway before answering. "Would you mind walking with me?" We stopped near a window overlooking the parking lot, morning sun spreading over the treeline beyond the hospital. He took a slow breath. "I've been doing this job almost 20 years. You scared me," I told him. "I know. I'm not a police officer. I can't accuse anyone of a crime without evidence. But I can tell you why I recognized him." My heart started pounding. "About 7 years ago," he said, "I responded to a domestic call on the other side of the county. There was a woman, young, single mother, with a broken wrist and a concussion. He was standing in that living room when we arrived." A chill moved through me. "What does that have to do with Derek?" "He told the deputies she'd fallen down the stairs," Reyes said. "The deputies couldn't prove otherwise. The woman wouldn't testify." "Why not?" He shrugged. "Fear. Financial dependence. Maybe she thought he'd change." He looked out the window for a long moment. There was a little girl there too. About your daughter's age. She wouldn't let go of her mother's shirt the entire time. I felt my knees go weak. He guided me to a nearby bench. You're saying Derek was involved? I'm saying I never forgot his face. Did he have a different last name back then? He nodded slowly. That's what bothered me the moment I saw him yesterday. It wasn't Bennett. He reached into his wallet and pulled out an old, worn business card with a faded case number written in blue ink on the back. I wrote this down years ago because something about that call never sat right with me. I kept telling myself I'd throw it away. I never did. I turned the card over in my hands. If I were you, he said quietly, I'd request the old police report. Maddie came home 2 days later. The doctor said she'd recover physically but needed rest and, more importantly, someone she felt safe with. That phrase stayed with me the rest of the day. Someone she felt safe with. It wasn't Derek. Not anymore, and maybe, if I was honest with myself, not for a long time. That evening, after Maddie fell asleep beside me, I searched the case number online. Nothing came up. I searched Derek's full name. Nothing unusual, a LinkedIn page, some old charity event photos, a picture from a church fundraiser. Clean cut. Friendly. Exactly the man everyone believed him to be. Then I remembered what Reyes had said. A different last name. I searched his birth date instead. Several results appeared. One caught my eye, a property record from Savannah dated 9 years earlier. The first name matched. The birthday matched. The last name did not. It read Whitfield. Derek Whitfield. He had never once mentioned another name in 11 years of marriage. The next morning, while Maddie watched cartoons, I drove to the county courthouse. The clerk, a woman in her 60s with reading glasses on a chain, disappeared into a back room and returned with a thin folder. You're lucky, she said. This one hadn't been sent to storage yet. Most of the file was sealed, but not all. It wasn't a criminal conviction, it was a petition for a protective order. Petitioner, Jenna Whitfield. Respondent, Derek Whitfield. Same birthday, same face, only the last name had changed. The petition described intimidation, controlling behavior, property damage, and threats. It had been withdrawn 6 weeks after it was filed. No explanation given. I sat there staring at those papers until the clerk gently asked if I was all right. I said yes. I wasn't. A deputy at the sheriff's office wouldn't discuss confidential records, but when I said the name Derek Whitfield, his eyebrows lifted slightly. If I were you, he said, lowering his voice, I'd talk to Detective Carl Morrow. He retired 3 years ago. Fishes more than he works these days. I called Morrow the next morning. He answered on the 4th ring, and when I explained why I was calling, the silence on the other end told me more than words could have. Can you meet me somewhere? He finally asked. We met at a small coffee shop downtown. He was easy to spot, late 60s, gray beard, weathered hands, the kind of man who looked more comfortable on a fishing boat than behind a desk. Derek Whitfield was never convicted of assault, he told me plainly. But he always managed to stay one step ahead. Witnesses changed their stories. Evidence disappeared. Victims withdrew complaints. Every single time. So everyone thought he was innocent, I said. Morrow gave a tired smile. No. We thought we couldn't prove he was guilty. Those are two very different things. I drove home with more questions than answers, but Derek's truck was already in the driveway. He'd cooked dinner, an actual home-cooked meal, an apron, a smile. Thought I'd surprise you, he said. Maddie sat at the table, quiet, watching him instead of her plate. Every time he reached for something, she flinched. It lasted less than a second. Most people wouldn't have noticed. I did. That week, I called an old army friend, Staff Sergeant Diego Marsh, who now worked in information technology on post. Over lunch, I explained everything. "You think he's careful?" he asked. "I know he is," I said. "He never loses control in public." Diego thought for a moment, then explained what I could legally record inside my own home and told me to confirm everything with an attorney first. My attorney, a woman named Carol Whitman through Army Legal Assistance, confirmed it. "As long as you're acting within the law," she said, "protecting your child comes first." I bought 2 small indoor cameras and installed them while Derek was at work, one tucked into a bookshelf, one blended into a corner shelf near the stairs. For days, nothing unusual happened. I began to wonder if fear had made me imagine monsters where none existed. Then, on a Friday, while I organized gear in the garage, I heard Derek's voice change inside the house. Sharp. Cold. Maddie. Silence. "Come here." A pause. Then her small, frightened voice. "I'm sorry." A crash. I ran inside. A broken glass lay on the kitchen floor. Maddie was crying, trembling. Derek said she'd dropped it. That night, after they were asleep, I watched the footage. Maddie had accidentally knocked over a glass reaching for the refrigerator. Derek had grabbed her arm hard enough to make her cry out and shoved a chair into the wall. I saved 3 copies immediately: laptop, encrypted flash drive, secure cloud storage. The next morning, every recording was gone. Wiped clean. Derek walked past with his coffee and said, almost cheerfully, "Technology isn't really your thing, babe. You should let me handle that stuff." What he didn't know was that Diego had already set up an automatic, encrypted backup on a separate secure drive before I ever plugged the cameras in. The evidence he thought he'd erased was already sitting safely somewhere he didn't know existed. I brought the flash drive to Carol Whitman's office the following Monday. She watched the footage without saying a word, then took off her glasses. She corrected herself gently, "This changes everything." Combined with Maddie's hospital records, the school notes, and Morrow's willingness to testify about Derek's past pattern, it painted a picture no one could dismiss as an overreaction. Over the following weeks, my life became a careful balancing act. By day, ordinary routines: packing lunches, folding laundry, grocery runs. At home, I watched, documented, backed everything up twice. Diego helped organize every file into folders: medical, school, video, written notes, phone logs. "If this ends up in court," he told me, "nobody can accuse you of making things up." Reyes stayed in touch too. One afternoon he called to tell me he'd tracked down the retired deputy who'd responded to that domestic call years earlier. "He remembers the little girl," Reyes said quietly. "She kept asking if her mom was going to die." I closed my eyes and looked out at Derek in the backyard, teaching Maddie to throw a baseball. To anyone driving by, it looked like a father spending time with his daughter. Only Maddie's stiff shoulders told the real story. Child Protective Services contacted me not because I'd filed a complaint, but because the hospital's concussion report had automatically triggered a review. The caseworker, Denise Marlowe, visited on a Thursday. Derek was charming, offering sweet tea and homemade cookies. When she asked to speak with Maddie alone, his smile faltered just slightly. That small crack gave me more hope than anything else had in weeks. The following Sunday, Derek suggested a backyard barbecue: his parents, my brother, the neighbors, people from church. "We could use a little normal around here," he said. I agreed, smiling on the outside while my heart pounded on the inside. Everything I'd gathered had already been shared with Carol, with CPS, and with Detective Morrow, who agreed to be present if needed. Saturday arrived warm and clear. Derek grilled burgers in his favorite polo shirt, laughing with neighbors, playing the role he'd perfected for 11 years. Maddie stayed close to me, flinching slightly whenever he reached toward her. Denise Marlowe attended under the pretense of being a family friend. Diego stood near the grill, laughing along with everyone else. Reyes came in jeans and a plain shirt, shaking Derek's hand like an old acquaintance. Mara waited in his truck across the street. Derek raised his cup to thank everyone for coming, mentioned it had been a stressful couple weeks, and asked if I wanted to say something. I stepped away from him. I do. The yard quieted. I've spent 11 years protecting someone I thought I knew, I said. Derek laughed nervously, told me I wasn't finished, but I nodded to Diego, who wheeled a television onto the patio table. Carol plugged in the media player. Derek stepped forward. No. It was the first real fear I had ever seen on his face. The video played. Maddie knocking over a glass. Derek's voice turning cold. His finger inches from her face. His hand gripping her arm. The chair slamming into the wall. Guests went silent, Pastor Mitchell lowered his plate, Mrs. Castillo covered her mouth. Derek lunged for the television. Diego stepped in front of him without flinching. I wouldn't. This isn't what it looks like, Derek said, looking around wildly. Reyes spoke quietly. I've seen this before. I recognized him the day Maddie came into the ER. Derek called him a liar. Mora walked through the gate holding a folder. So am I lying too? 2 patrol cars pulled up to the curb. An officer called out, Derek Whitfield. Derek froze at the sound of the name he thought no one here would ever know, then turned and ran. He didn't make it 20 feet before an officer caught him. The only sound in the silent backyard was Maddie's small voice behind me. Mom. I turned, and she ran into my arms. This time, I didn't let go. The arrest made the local news simply because of how public it was. By Monday, most of Hinesville had heard some version of the story. Casseroles appeared on my porch with handwritten notes. None of it erased the image of Maddie hiding behind me every time someone knocked on the door. Bail was denied. The weeks that followed brought detective interviews, DA meetings, more paperwork than I'd filled out during half my Army career. Maddie began seeing a child psychologist, Dr. Naomi Price, whose office looked more like a playroom than a clinic. After the 3rd session, Dr. Price told me gently that Maddie was carrying guilt, the belief that she'd caused all of it. She told me she was trying to be good, Dr. Price said. I remembered those exact words from the night before my field rotation, and it nearly broke me all over again. A month later, Derek accepted a plea agreement on felony child abuse and domestic assault charges rather than risk trial. The evidence, medical records, video, my notebook, witness testimony, even his own attempt to erase the footage, was overwhelming. He was sentenced to several years in state prison. Before deputies led him away, he turned and looked at me one last time. I looked back. There was nothing left to say. A year changes the way you notice things. I retired from the Army after 19 years of service, something I'd once thought I'd never willingly do. I missed the people, the purpose, even the terrible coffee, but I never missed feeling like I had to choose between serving my country and protecting my daughter. Maddie started 1st grade. The nightmares came less often. She smiled more, laughed more, real laughter, not the careful kind. We moved into a small house just outside town with a garden that squirrels kept raiding and 2 rocking chairs on the porch. My biggest weekend project became keeping rabbits out of the tomatoes instead of managing convoy manifests. It was a life I never imagined wanting, and now I couldn't imagine wanting anything else. Every afternoon, I picked her up from school, and every afternoon, she ran the moment she spotted me, arms out, backpack bouncing. A year earlier, I'd come home expecting that same hug and found something that nearly destroyed us both. Now it happened every single day, not because life had become perfect, but because she finally felt safe enough to run towards someone instead of away from them. People at the grocery store sometimes still recognized me. They always asked the same question, did I regret exposing him? I always gave the same answer. No. Then I'd add something they didn't expect. I regret not asking harder questions years earlier. regret and guilt aren't the same thing. It took me a long time to understand that. A few weeks ago, Reyes stopped by the house with his wife. We sat on the porch drinking sweet tea while Maddie showed him the vegetable garden. "I've answered thousands of calls in this job," he told me. "This is the first one I've ever seen end like this." I watched Maddie chasing butterflies across the yard and told him the same was true for me. If this experience taught me anything, it's that courage doesn't always look the way you expect. Sometimes it isn't a uniform, a courtroom, or a police report. Sometimes it's simply believing a frightened child when something doesn't feel right, and finding the strength to act before fear talks you out of it. Thank you for spending this time with me. If this story meant something to you, I hope you'll remember this: the people who trust you most deserve a home that never becomes the thing they're afraid of.